So thank you for letting me come back. The purpose of the time this morning is to kind of give you all feedback and to review again about the interviews and things like that, that whole process. So first of all, let me say there were some really good things about your interviews. And have you all gotten your grades in your interviews? Okay. And did you talk about it yet? Did you talk about it at all? Not much? Okay. Okay. So just some really good feedback. First of all, across the board, I can say you all make a good personal connection. You all had good eye contact. When you walked in, you were ready to engage. As you gave your answers in the interview and things like that, you all did a very good job of making that kind of eye contact and having it feel connected, like you were actually having a conversation with us. And a lot of people can't do that. A lot of people get so nervous that they're kind of staring at the sky or looking down at the ground or that kind of thing. So just making that kind of personal connection with the person that you're interviewing with is a very, very valuable thing. So that was good. So here's my self-acknowledgement. I'm a problem solver, so I tend to critique better than I do kudos. You know what I mean? And so admittedly, I'm going to spend more time on the kind of feedback of here's some suggestions of things to do differently. So forgive me for that, and don't walk away feeling at all discouraged. There were some very good things about your interviews, but I want to make this a little bit brutal because when you all get out, I tell you, every time I do these interviews, and I was on a panel yesterday about interviews. I do mock interviews with this class. I do mock interviews with other classes. And every time I walk away feeling like you guys have so much to offer. You have so much to offer. You not only have the technical skills, but you have the experience here that focuses on people, on the personal parts of things, on the importance of interpersonal relationships, about caring for others, cooperation, all those kinds of good things. And unless and until you can communicate that effectively in an interview, you're not going to get the chance to go in there and apply that to a job. So again, every time I do these interviews, I walk away with a little bit of almost grieving. Oh, we've got to get you guys where you can communicate that effectively in an interview in such a way that you get the job, because you have so much to offer that I just am absolutely confident if you get the job, whoever hires you is going to be like, wow, this guy's been fantastic, or this lady's been fantastic in joining our team. We're so glad that we got them. But just the reality of it, you have to get over that hump of actually getting the job, making the good impression, selling yourself in such a way that makes the employer realize that, yes, indeed, you are the person for the job. Okay? So I'm going to give you, again, some kind of brutal feedback. First of all, I know this was just a class assignment, and I know it's easy to kind of blow off a class assignment. But one of the things that we ask of you is that you treat this as if you were actually applying for a job. Okay? So I went into it with that as the standard. I'm going to pretend that I'm an employer and that you all are actually applying for a job. I didn't get emails that I would expect to get as an employer. The emails that I got, which were very limited, I didn't even get very many emails of, here's my application, thank you so much for considering me, here attached is my cover letter and my resume. The emails that I did get were typos, obviously done on a phone with, no punctuation, acrostics for words, things like that. I can give you the benefit of the doubt that you were doing it just as a class assignment and not like you would a job. But I'm also going to tell you, if you're really applying for a job and you do that, you have sunk yourself. You are not going any further in the process if you send a text of, hey, how do I apply for this job, question mark, kind of thing. That'll totally destroy your opportunity. You will not get any further. So again, I'm going to do the assumption that you're doing it because it's us and it was an assignment and not an actual employer. But I'm also going to tell you a heads up is if you are actually applying for a job, don't do that. You have to treat every single interaction with the employer as if you had to be as polished as you're on. You have to be as polished as you're ever going to be with every single interaction that you have with that employer. And it starts with potentially a networking, let's say you're a networking opportunity. Maybe you're at an event where you're having an opportunity to meet professionals that you're thinking, hey, these might be people that can either hire me or help get me hired someplace else. You're on. You're always, always on, okay? Because this is your opportunity to sell yourself. If it's that first email where you're saying, I understand that you have this position open and I'd very much like to be considered, what process should I go through to apply and show my interest? Those kinds of initial interview or initial emails and contact, whether it's an email or a phone call, you're on. You have to be on. You have to be absolutely polished. You can't let your guard down and think that this is an informal process. It's never an informal process. You don't get to be informal until you're in the job and you've gotten some of that kind of credibility already because you're already in there proving yourself. Until then, you never get the advantage of, or the benefit, the ease of being informal. You always have to be on with every single thing that you do, okay? Because you never know when that's the trigger. I mean, when I interviewed, one of the first jobs that I had out of college, I was doing every single interview for a company, a manufacturing company. So people would come in for an interview and they'd sit in the reception area. As soon as I did the interview and the person left, the first place I went was to the receptionist. First person I talked to after an interview was the receptionist. How did they treat you? What did they look like when they came in? How did they behave? I talked to the receptionist. Now, would you necessarily think that you had to be on with the receptionist? Most applicants, frankly, didn't. And they wouldn't come in and they wouldn't be friendly. They wouldn't make a good first impression with the receptionist. They wouldn't engage in any kind of professional dialogue with the receptionist. They wouldn't be professional with people that walked through that. I mean, the plant manager would be walking through that reception area. Other supervisors would be walking through. So part of the question was, did they look up? Did they say good morning? Did they engage at all? Most of the people sitting there thought, it doesn't matter yet, I'm not in my interview. But guess what? You've got to be on. You've got to be on continuously until you're in the job and you're already in there working and you're getting that credibility so that you can start letting your guard down a little bit, okay? So you never know which one of those interactions is going to be the trigger. Because I guarantee you when I walked out to the receptionist and she said, man, he wouldn't even look up at people. He barely said good morning to me when he walked in. He was frankly kind of rude. Well, guess what? That's the end. That was the trigger. That person didn't go any further in the process. It's those kinds of things that what I want to passionately relay to you. Those are the kinds of things that can sink you. And it's such a bummer because you have so much to offer. I don't want those things to be the things that keep you from getting the job, okay? It's not worth it. You can't let those things hinder you from getting the job that you want to get. I was on an interview panel yesterday, which included a guy from ConocoPhillips, okay? So a major employer with jobs that many of our graduates would like to get. And what he described was, the way he described it was low-hanging fruit. It's those little things that you can do along the way that'll either sink you or set you apart in a good way. And they're easy things. They're not hard things to do, okay? For example, here's another example, your resumes. Almost across the board, I don't think we had a single resume that didn't have a typo on a resume. You cannot do that. Now again, I can go into it with the assumption that it's just a class assignment and so maybe you did it in 30 minutes the night before sort of thing. But I at least want to relate to you that if that's the resume that you're using for a real job, don't do that. You can't have a typo. You can't have that kind of low-hanging fruit be the trigger that makes you go in the nose stack and not even get considered any further, okay? So things like typos on your resume. Yesterday he talked about when you walk into the interview and you shake hands. How many of you, when you walked in, automatically extended your hand for the interview to shake my hand? Was that part of what you automatically did? And when you shake it, you've got to practice. This kind of shaking hands, every single person on the interview panel yesterday, there were 6 people on this interview panel, every single one said, man, if I get that fishy handshake, I'm done. Okay, so You might look at it and think, I didn't even know I was supposed to shake hands. And you certainly probably haven't talked about how do you shake hands? What's a professional handshake? But that's the kind of low-hanging fruit trigger that will make your interview person go, I'm done, I'm done. It may seem unfair, and it may seem like it's not a good way for interviewers to really gauge whether a person's qualified for the job, but it is reality. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to keep you from getting further in the process and keep you from being able to prove that you've got all to offer that you have to offer. Because you do have great things to offer, okay? In your resumes, typos, grammar, there were some grammatical mistakes in the resumes. Guys, you've got to look that stuff over. And if you're not gifted in that area, you go find you an English major. You go find you somebody that's good at it and say, hey, for 10 minutes, can you look at my resume? Probably a separate set of eyes, because I totally appreciate once you've stared at something over and over and over again, it starts to kind of, you don't even hardly see it anymore. So get another set of eyes to look at your resume, just for things like grammar and typos. Do all the bullets match? Are the fonts the same? Does everything line up the way it's supposed to? Those kinds of just basic formatting things, okay? Low-hanging fruit was what the guy called it yesterday. But I'm telling you, it will keep you from going further in the process, okay? Again, a cover letter. Now, we didn't tell you. When we said, at least as far as I know, when Professor View said, this is your assignment, he didn't say you need to do a cover letter, you need to make an initial contact by email, you need to be sure that you've got your resume into me with the cover letter. He didn't give you those kinds of directives, right? I'm guessing he didn't tell you all those kinds of details.
But Jessica had come in and done a training this semester on all those aspects, and we watched like 3 or 4 different videos. I don't know if the videos say anything about the cover letter, but they knew that.
So why didn't you do it? I mean, truly, I'm serious. I mean, did you think it wasn't important? Did you think it was just because it was just kind of mock and plain, you know, wasn't a real thing? Okay, I'm telling you guys, you can't do that. At least if it's a real. Again, I'm gonna err on the side of thinking you kind of blew it off a little bit. But when you're actually applying for a job, don't blow that stuff off. That will keep you from getting the job. It will keep you from advancing the process.
Well, can I say something about that? Because I jumped in my mind several times. You're really practicing failing. If you're in basketball, right? And you go out for basketball practice, and you just kind of, you do it. It's just a practice, doesn't really count. What's more likely to happen when you get to the real game?
Same thing.
Yeah, or you're going to try to use your energy to make up for not practicing and get overplay. So it's really, that's the trick about this, is to get your own mindset. It's your attitude about what we're doing. Is it important? And I sympathize completely, because I think sometimes I've overemphasized the facts about the educational system, and we recognize that it's a game on one hand, but it's also a very important game. And it's what you use the game to do. You can use that game to advance yourself, or you can use that game to just get by. But what my fear is that just getting by becomes a habit. And I mean, I know it does, because I've been there. I do it myself.
The other thing with the practice analogy, there's a great comment still, is you never know who's in the stands. You never know when the scout's sitting in the stands, you know? When you're doing these kinds of things here, do any of you know who I'm connected to in the community? I mean, I'm not saying anything special about me, but Bartlesville's a small town.
Yeah.
I've been in Bartlesville working professionally for 20 years. So, do you know whether or not from those interviews I'm thinking, oh man, who can I call? Because we've got this great person that I just had a chance to interview somebody that was phenomenal. So-and-so needs to know about that person. So you could assume that it was just for practice, just for play, or you could come into an assignment like this and think, you know what, this might be the first impression that I'm making. This might be the first trigger that's going to help me get the job I want or not. You just never know. You never know when talking to the receptionist is going to be a make it or break it. You never know which step in the process is what's going to get you that dream job. Okay?
And it's a subjective process. Every grade you get from me is a subjective. It's my subjective judgment about what you've done. Yeah, I can count how many grammar errors you have and all that. But even then, if I know you're really twerking your work, doing your best work, I'm going to give you a break. I'm much more likely to, if it comes between an A or a B, I'm much more likely to give you, and it's unfair, but it's reality. It's really about subjective. And so it's, if you know Julia and Julia knows you looks like you're doing your best, that's what she's going to remember about you.
And when it comes for interviewing and things like that, all these things put together, and you never know which trigger it is, but all these things put together may give you some of that kind of allowance that you might not otherwise have. So for example, let's say it's me, that you've interviewed with me, and I've called somebody that I know to say, hey, you really need to look at this student. They are so impressive. And maybe your resume isn't absolutely fantastic. Now, I'm happy to work with you to get it as close to perfection as we can get it. But let's say we missed a typo, or there was something that was bulleted that shouldn't be bulleted, sort of thing. But because I've called that person and said, hey, you really need to look at it, that subjective, objective stuff is going to start factoring in. So the person may see, oh, well, the resume's kind of disorganized. There should be bullets, or those don't quite line up. But you know, Julia called me and said, this person's really good, so I'm going to go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt and bring them in for an interview, sort of thing. So some of that kind of thing you'll get, but you never know what piece of the process is getting you that. Is it knowing Professor View? Is it having interviewed with me? Is it because somebody on campus knows you? You just never know where that thing is going to come, you know?
It's really similar to, you guys are going to graduate and you want to go to, some of you might not be about a job, it might be about getting into graduate school, and they want a reference letter. And I always get, Professor View, would you send a reference letter to this? You know, it's not my favorite thing to do, guys. And I do have a form letter, essentially. But if I know you, and I remember, man, I know he's going to be good at this. I know she's going to be, you think it's more likely that I'll add that extra paragraph on there, or will I just, if it's about somebody that just sort of did whatever they, just to get by, I'll just do it. I'll probably the same for me. I'll probably do, just to get by on that letter, I'll sign it. It'll be very sincere, I won't lie, but it makes a difference. Everything you do, coming late to class, makes a difference. It all adds up, unfortunately, to that subjective judgment. And I hate being in that position, because like Julia's been preaching to you this morning, I know each one of you is a unique, fantastic, God-created gifts to the world. You are potential beyond compare. Every one of us is. But it comes right down to it. Somebody wants me to make a judgment. And it's part of the job. And we always hope, I always try to build in that there's consequences will lead to you waking up if you're asleep, or if you're just getting by. How could I stimulate you to really be wanting to use this to produce that creativity? That I believe it only lies in you. I believe each one of you has a creativity and a purpose in this world that's you're the only source of it. Now, I think God's will be done, whether you produce your source or not. But it's like I always tell people, I think God's will is going to happen. It's whether, how much am I going to be involved in it? How much am I going to, and I think when you're more involved in it, I think you have a lot more sense of, you have a better experience.
Sense of purpose.
Yeah, it's like, this isn't so bad, even though there are bad things. I can come up with this other list over here, yeah, but these even the bad things can become good.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, good thoughts, good comments. Okay, a couple other things. One of the things that I noticed, and I think it's partly it's partly a sign of the times, and it's partly because when you're in school like you all are, there's so many group projects and so many things that you're doing together. And it's good in an interview to be able to talk about your ability to work with others and do group projects and things like that. But don't forget to don't forget to highlight you. So in the interview, one of the things I noticed was kind of a trend is well, we did this and we did that. You know, you want to be sure that at least for the bulk of your interview, you're talking about you in terms of what you can offer. Because I'm not hiring your team, okay? When you're in for an interview, I want to know that you can get along with other people and that you can give me some examples of how that. But when I say, what did you do in that job? Don't say, well, we did such and such, we did such and such. You can say, I worked within a team, but then say what I accomplished. I, brought organization to the workplace. I launched a new product for them, or I was on a creativity team that helped to develop the website. I brought to the table this. Don't be afraid to talk about you and you alone. Again, it's perfectly fine in the interview to talk about how it is you've interacted with others and to bring in some of that group dynamic stuff. That's good because you're going to have to work with other people. But ultimately, I'm hiring an individual, and I need to know that you can do the job. Okay? So be sure, at least in the bulk of your answers, you're talking specifically about your strengths and what you would bring to the table, not what the collaborative group altogether accomplishes. Okay? The other thing just to keep in mind, again, always on, this is you selling yourself for the job that you want. But remember that what I'm looking at as the interviewer, the only reason I ask the questions that I ask is because I want to find out whether or not you will allow my company to accomplish its goals. I want to find out what you will do for us, frankly. So when you're thinking about your answers and thinking about what you want to highlight in terms of your qualifications, be sure that you're looking at it through that perspective. I'll ask you about your past positions, but why do I do that? Why do I care what you did before? I care because I want to know whether what you did before is going to pay off anything for me now. If I hire you in this position, does what you did in those past jobs make you better able to allow my company to achieve what it needs to achieve and to be successful? Okay? It's a little bit of a different vantage point. It's a little different way to look at things. But if you keep that kind of as your theme and your filtering device in your own mind, to ask yourself, okay, with this question, or when they say, tell me about yourself, for example, some of those open-ended questions that you could probably expect to get in an interview, be sure that the answer that you're going for is answering that question for the person. What can I do for you? How can I make your company more successful? Okay? That kind of vantage point, because that's all I'm trying to do as an interviewer. I'm trying to piece together the bits and pieces that you're telling me about to find out whether or not you're going to be a good fit and you're going to help us be more successful. Okay? So the more that you do that, the more that you connect those dots and that you highlight those things about yourself, the less guessing I'm doing, because I'm just doing my best guess based on the answers that you give me. But you know, you know yourself, you know your strengths, you know what you're able to do. So the more that you're able to highlight those things yourself, then I'm not guessing. Then I know it because you flat out told me. Okay? So that's very, very valuable. Okay, I'm going to stop talking as far as just preaching at you. Tell me what questions you have. When you were done with your interview, did you walk away wondering anything in particular, or based on this feedback, what questions do you have?
I have a question.
Sure.
I submitted my cover letter, but you said an email gets adjusted, I dropped it off in person.
That's fantastic. That's no problem.
But I didn't get any points for it, so I was wondering if I would just completely mess it up or.
The only reason I would think you got no points is if she didn't recall that she had it.
Okay.
So we might want to follow up with Jessica and find out, did you give it to her personally?
I didn't give it to her personally because somebody was in her office and
Yeah.
wanted to work. But
Okay, so maybe we just need to make sure that that connection happened. So here's a piece of advice with that. So whenever you don't make an actual connection with the person that you know ultimately needs to get something, maybe a quick follow-up email.
Yeah,
You did that, way to go, way to go. Okay, so something like that, just to, hey, just want to double check, I dropped it off for so-and-so. Good job, we'll double check on that. Bill, are you making a note?
Yeah, I'm taking
Okay.
notes on that.
Other questions?
I think that Amber Brown also had the same question,
Okay.
but I don't think she got no points. I think maybe it was lower points, and it could be because typos or something like that in it.
Yeah.
I didn't get copies of all, or she had them, she was shooting them around, and I just quit trying to keep track of all of them, so she's got them.
I will tell you one thing, and and I said I was gonna shut up, but you guys just interject whatever questions you
Yeah,
have.
everybody knew that.
One thing on your, whenever you're listing your education, your experience, you want to start with the most recent thing first. I know some of y'all had that flip-flop. You started with the oldest and then worked your way down. What you most want to highlight is the thing that you've done most recently. So when you're listing those job experiences, be sure you put whatever the most recent one is first and then work backwards, okay? Same thing with your schooling. You'll always want to put, because the first thing that somebody sees, that's just human nature. When you're reading a paragraph, you see the first line a lot more than you see the middle or the last line, right? So the first thing, that first line is what you most want to highlight. And what you most want to highlight, like with education, is your most advanced education, the highest thing that you've done. Okay, so you always want to put whatever your most advanced thing is first in terms of education. And in terms of experience, what I end up doing when I see a resume like that is I try to find the end, because I want to know what you're doing right now, what you've done most recently, because that's probably what's going to impact your ability to do this job most, is what's happened in the last 2 years, sort of thing.
And those kind of things, chances are, if you don't do them now or like right after class, what's the chances that you're going to fix that
And forget it.
and forget it
Mhm.
and turn it into somebody else just like that again? So I would take all this stuff that she has been telling you, and I know you've got other assignments, and I know this one's over, but that's the part of education that you really have to fight. Just doing it to get the assignment over with so you did the next one. Because it's really about doing it so that you can get a job, function, and to take advantage of fixing it now versus, because I'm terrible about that. I'll put stuff off and think, I'll do that later. Never have. It doesn't happen. I'll notice it after I turn it back in again to somebody else, or I turn it into my professor, my mentor. They don't call them professors, they call them mentors. Tormentors, I think. No, he's
Okay.
not. I got a great mentor.
Other questions?
Any questions on the categories, like recovery? You know what that means? I think there's one.
You have a question. So, when's the latest we could do a follow-up letter? Or-
Usually you want to do a thank you card, or, and yesterday, in fact, one of the guys that was on this interview panel that is out there hiring people right now, he noted that a handwritten thank you card really is fantastic, and I tend to agree. Now, be sure it's neat, and to me, if you can do more than just a thanks for your time, sincerely, it has a little bit more punch to it, you know what I mean? I enjoy learning more about your company, or I'm especially excited about the such and such that you mentioned. Something that is more than just a one-liner is ideal. But bottom line is, a thank you card. I frankly, when I do an interview, I sit in the car, if I can sit in their parking lot without being seen, or I drive off to another parking lot, and I sit there right after the interview while it's fresh in my mind, and I do the thank you card. Right then and there. Because if I mail it then, they're probably gonna get it maybe a day or two later, which is about the perfect amount of time. And then if you haven't heard anything, usually I suggest for the first 2 weeks or so that you do a once-a-week follow-up, okay? So here's the comparison that I give you. Think of it as a Saturday night date. So you've got on the Saturday night date. When do you follow up with the person if you like them? You're probably not gonna wait a week to call them. You're probably gonna, Sunday afternoon, pick up the phone, hey, just wanted, how's it going? Had fun last night? You know what I mean? The same time, you wanna be fresh on the person's brain, but you also don't wanna be obnoxious. And so you're not gonna call every single day, forget the Saturday night thing, because if she likes you too, then you're all are gonna call every single day. But you don't want to get so obnoxious with them, but an immediate thank you note that they would get within 2 days of the interview, and then a weekly follow-up for the first week or two, and then you can start spacing them out more, because once you get 2 weeks past, either they're bogged down and they are not, it's just one more thing on their to-do list and they're just not getting it done, or probably they're pursuing other people. But then you might do like every 2 weeks, and if you've gone, let's say, a month out, what I would suggest when you talk to them is just say, I just want to be sure that I am still very interested in your company and the opportunities that might exist there. How should I follow up with you? What would you most prefer for me to do to be sure that my application can still be considered? you can always ask them, especially after you get past those first few weeks. And that way they can give you guidance. Okay.
Because with the Easter break, I kind of forgot the day, and then we were already on break, so. I didn't know.
See, that's what happens. That's why I love doing it right then. I mean, I literally take the note card with me, so it's in my car when I go for an interview. So I'm all ready to go. Sometimes, frankly, I even write it, the bulk of it, before I even go to the interview.
It's kind of like what you said a while ago too about, I thought of it, it's like they're inviting you to join their family, and how you interact with people that if you're that something, because if Julia's the one doing the interview and they hire you and you are not a good person for the job, who do you think, that person that did the interview, they're going to come back to her and they're going to say, what were you thinking? And so her job, she's a gatekeeper into their family. And it's like getting married, right? You always put your best foot forward, but you don't do it obnoxiously. You do it humbly, but you still, you can think of it that way. I think that makes it seem, it's more realistic probably, because they're not going to let you in their family unless they really think they can live with you. So that's what I usually tell them. I say, they're really interviewing you to see if they can live with you.
Yeah.
They don't look at they never
For
looked at my
50 hours a
grades.
week.
They
More
didn't care
time
if I
than
made
probably
straight
with your
A's.
family.
That wasn't even, I don't think anybody ever asked me, mentioned my grades.
Yeah.
They just wanted to know, do you have the degree and will you fit into our family? And you know, sometimes you may interview with somebody, you go, I don't think I'm going to fit into this family. I don't
That's
want to
right.
be in this
Yeah.
family.
I mean, that's part of it that we haven't talked a whole lot about, is the interview process is also a chance for you to decide if you want them. We emphasize a whole lot about whether or not they want you, but ultimately it is also the question of whether or not you want them.
There's a lot of mental health centers that
You want to work at.
I wished I didn't have to work at. Sometimes I did but you just don't know everything, but doing that research ahead of time and asking the questions can help.
Yeah.
Also, when they see you having an interest in whether you're wanting to be a part of them, they see that you care about yourself. You know, it's also a good sign that you're not just doing anything to get the job, you know, kissing up or whatever. You know, you're there because you want to advance your career too. And if you're going to bring your talents and everything to this table, will my talents really fit in here? And can you tell me how that would happen? You know, how are you going to use my talents? You know?
Okay, other questions? How many of you have started actually applying for jobs? You actually applied for a job, okay?
He actually went and did one at the week, Monday, after we did our interview.
Okay, good. Was it similar?
She asked me a lot of like personal questions that were like kind of like the STAR approach, but I don't know, it was more laid back than I thought.
Yeah. One of the things that came up again with this panel that I was on yesterday, it's fresh in my brain, which is part of why I keep talking about it, but one of the panel people said, you know, the fact of the matter is a lot of the interviews that you'll go through as a professional aren't as structured as what people who do interviews all the time probably conduct. You may be talking to a manager that does an interview once every 3 or 4 years because they just do it when they have an opening, and it's not very often. So it's very possible that you'll end up at an interview that is less structured and doesn't have the same kind of flow as what you experience when you're doing these mock interviews where we're very structured about it. Those are almost harder. They should feel harder in a lot of ways for you. In that, when that happens, you've got to drive it to be sure that what you want them to know about you is coming across. So when it's just kind of informal, and frankly, I've been in some where I walk out and I'm like, that was a 45-minute interview, and they talked for 40 minutes. How do they know anything about me? Because they talked for 40 minutes. Well, if I'm good as an interviewee, I'm making sure the 5 minutes I get, man, I'm loading it in there. I know exactly what I want to highlight. I know what I want them to know about me because I have a very short opportunity to do my little sales pitch, my commercial on why me, why I'm the person that you need to hire. So in many respects, those informal ones that are much less structured are very much more challenging The other thing about it is, it's easy when that person's informal to start feeling a little informal yourself.
Mhm.
Don't forget, you are always on. You are always, always, always on. That came up in the panel yesterday too, is a couple of them said, you know, I almost always get the person out of the office into a less formal situation. I take them to lunch, or I walk them on a tour. I do something so that we're not sitting across the desk. Because when we're sitting across the desk, that person is prim and proper and professional and, you know. And then we get out, and suddenly, they put their guard down. And now I'm starting to see more of the real them, and it's a little bit alarming, sort of thing. So just remember, no matter how informal the scenario gets, you still need to be on. You still need to be sure that you're giving your absolute best. Okay?
Yeah,
Because you're still making an impression.
when I interviewed here, the last thing we did, Dr. Myers, who was the vice president then, took Valerie and I, my wife and I, out to Jude's, and we sat down and had coffee. And he said to ask, he wanted to know any questions I had or any concerns I had. So it was exactly that. It was an informal way to all, and they did not only I had to go into an interview with a big table with Dr. Piper and Weeder and there was like 7 or 8,
Yeah.
Kyle White. There was like 10 people in that room, and that was my interview.
Yeah.
And it was pretty intimidating. I really wasn't scared though, because I just thought I really didn't think there was a chance they'd hire me, honestly, because I was a clinical social worker and they were hiring me to teach psychology. It just didn't make sense in my view of the academic world. If you went to Kansas University, they'd say, you're in the wrong school. You need to go to a social work school.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was more relaxed as a result of that, and so I just was open. I'm always pretty open though. So it was pretty laid back in spite of that. It wasn't real structured. They asked me several structured questions, and one I really muffed. And I always tell them this one. What is your theoretical orientation? It had been so long since anybody had asked me that. I could And Kyle White actually saved me. He said, well, systems approach? And I said, well, yeah, family systems, right. But